Get Pucked.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Get Pucked podcast. Vito, Matt, and Greg here with you. Unfortunately, no Dave, but we'll hope to get him on the next one. Gentlemen, how you doing? How's summer treating you?
It's hot.
Good. It's hot.
It's very hot.
Good.
It's very hot.
Let's talk about. Let's dive right into it. I want to talk about some movement that's actually happened. So it's always fun to get some Canadiens news and dog days of summer, which is nice and fun. There were signings, and that would be plural. So we have 3 signings to talk about, and I want to get your take on them. We'll start with Guhle, who signed and locked up 6 years at $5.55 per season. We have Xhekaj, who did finally sign 1.3 for 2 years, and Barron also signs 1.15 for 2 years. So a couple of interesting things there. There's a couple of each one of those contracts seems to have a bit of a story. Let's just start with that. So just to go kind of through it quickly, and I want to get your take on it here. So with Barron, I think you can look at it and you can sort of conclude that this is a show me contract. You got 2 years, show us what's going to happen. It's a low AAV. Let's see what's going to happen with him. Xhekaj, while it's the same term, slightly more money, but it's not, I mean, it's show me, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like it's different. I feel like he also wanted this. I think Barron would have wanted more, but Xhekaj is probably also betting on himself. I think he wants to really make a stance and go and do a strong season and a half, and then sign a big time contract. So that one might bite in the future. I don't know. Guhle is the other way. Looks like from Guhle's camp, we hear that he wanted 8 years, and the Habs were more like, no, we want 6. 8 is just too much. We want 6. And the term, I think we're all going to probably agree, is pretty much what is expected for him. But maybe I'm speaking out of turn. So let's talk about it. Greg, give me a breakdown of these contracts. What do you think, man?
Well, to start, I think the first one was about the Xhekaj one. I think, like you said, I agree with what you said a little bit. It's like a midway between a show me contract and a contract that allows him to kind of bet on himself and try to prove over those 2 years that he can deserve more of a longer term and be part of the solution, like in the future. For Barron, I've already said a little bit about my opinion about him. I don't think he's going to be a long-term solution, but I think it's good that we keep him around. We never know with defensemen, especially if someone can be a late bloomer, pan out later than usual, and I wouldn't have been against trading him while he still has some value, but you never know. Like I said, maybe he's the best is yet to come for Barron. And finally for Guhle, I think it's the perfect term, and money is pretty much what we expected. Well, for me, and I think it's interesting as well the reports that came out about they tried a little bit to see if an 8-year deal could work, and I feel it's interesting to see that Hughes played it a little bit more safe, and especially with some injury concerns on his part. I think it was the smart thing to do, and 6 years is still term. It's still a long time, but it's also a safe bet on if something doesn't work out, or if he becomes too injury prone or whatever like that. We're not there's still some flexibility on that 6 year.
Wise beyond your years, Greg. I agree. Vito, what do you think?
All right, I'll start with Barron first. So Barron, it's definitely, I think if he wasn't a right-hand defenseman, he probably wouldn't even have been extended. That's honestly my opinion. The fact that he's right-handed and Montreal's kind of weak at that position and lacks depth at the right-hand side, especially players that could play right now today at the NHL level. I think that's one of the reasons why he was signed. The other thing too, they're all pretty much prove me contracts. A little less so with Guhle, but it's also a prove me contract when you think of it, because he's 22 right now, and it's a 6-year deal for him. Xhekaj,
prove me contract.
well, kind of, right? Because if they wanted, otherwise they would have given him the 8th. They would have given him the 8th, but he's also technically probably figuring, him and his agent are figuring that and probably even Kent Hughes, that there are injury concerns there. He is a core piece, but to Greg's point, at $5.5 million, 6 years, if he ends up being an LTIR candidate, it's digestible in a sense, right? And if he's somebody that you have to move down the road, you can still move him easily, not take a massive hit. It's not somebody that you're looking at that's going to be $8 million, which the rumor was that it was an 8-year ask for $8 million, similar to Jake Sanderson's contract. And Guhle, I do think that Guhle is going to be the guy that replaced Matheson, and he's going to be the top 4 guy who's going to be relied upon, eat big minutes and all that. And you and I actually had a conversation a few weeks ago, Matt, before the signing even happened, where I said to you that that Guhle, I was expecting Guhle to sign at around 6.5, 7 million. I expected that that's where it was going to trend. It was going to trend toward that direction. Maybe not this year, but in a couple of years from now. I even said I wouldn't be surprised if they went on a bridge deal with him, which I don't think would have been the best route for him. The only thing is that you definitely see that log jam. They need to clear up that left side. And so to really put him to play his strengths. Because I don't like the fact that they're playing Guhle on the offhand. He needs to play left side. You saw it with the Olympics and all of that, that he needs to get back on the left side. Right now, there's somebody by the name of Matheson that's kind of in the way for him to be the 1, but at the very least, put him there at the 2 on the second pairing. So I cover Guhle and Barron there. Xhekaj, you know my sentiments about Xhekaj. I still think that his ceiling is a very solid defensive defenseman forward that can provide some secondary scoring. That's his ceiling to me. But he brings that toughness, he brings that ruggedness to his game. He's like a unicorn out there, right? That's why I also think that he got a little bit.
Is that a quote that you're stealing from? What was it? Who said it when they were going through the draft? Remember they had that. Greg, do you remember what I'm talking about? Anyways, I don't mean to.
I think you're on mute. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, you're on mute, Greg.
I don't. It was one of the scouts. I think it was.
Yeah, one of the scouts called somebody a unicorn. I thought it was Xhekaj. Anyways, go ahead.
But it was his younger brother.
His brother. Okay, that's why. There you go. Okay.
I know one of the Xhekajs, right? But no, I didn't think it from anybody. Honestly, it just came from my mind right there. But just to say, I think he's the ideal guy for this team, and you need somebody to defend and stick up for their players. And his offensive game is underrated. Where I can see the fact that he's betting on himself, but at the same time, Montreal's taking a cautious approach with him, is because at the end of the day, even though he's got all the elements that you'd like and you'd want on this team, and he's an attractive player for other teams as well, fact of the matter is that he's just had 2 shoulder surgeries. And if you commit a long-term contract to Xhekaj and all of a sudden he tears that shoulder again and, puts his career in jeopardy, you don't want to commit to too long of a term. But at the same time, it's one of those contracts and one of those players that in 2 years' time, if he has 2 solid outings and with no injuries and all that, it's gonna be a bit more costly down the road for Montreal. I still think that Xhekaj is one of those guys, one of those defensive defensemen who could potentially be a $5 million guy down the road. Potentially, if he hits his ceiling, he's gonna be. I could see him being a $5 million D-man. But he has to get there. I mean, some people might crucify me on in the comments section for saying that about him. But with the cap going up, I still think that 5.5 is going to be the new $3.5–4 million.
I have a question though for you. Like you're saying, Xhekaj could become a $5 million defenseman, right? And that's with like money value like going up. So maybe like the equivalent of 4 millions today, I guess.
Yeah.
But do you have like a comparable for how you could see Xhekaj as if he hits his ceiling as you see him? Or is it just like a Radko Gudas or like something like that, or it's?
The thing is that there isn't really a comparable for him today. In today's NHL, there's not many players that play like him that bring the total package that he could potentially bring. Like you saw some flashes last year when he was healthy, when he rips a shot and doesn't get into the penalty box, that he has that heavy shot. He has that the ability to skate around and really drive some offense. So I could see him being more of a, at ceiling peak, like a 30-point guy. But defensively sound and at the same time could stick up for his teammates.
It's like
Could
Luke Shen with some offensive abilities and better skating.
yeah, you could. He's not. That's not a bad comparable. And look where Luke Shen was. You know what I mean? I
And
mean, he
Luke
was
Shen was
drafted
drafted
too
like
high back
yeah.
then. But I would even say that I would have more faith. And it's going to say a lot. This is going to piss off. I would have more faith in Xhekaj's ceiling than Luke Shen's ceiling when he was drafted. I think Luke Shen was drafted too high and he was at a transition of when the NHL was changing, and he was part of the old style of hockey, and it didn't transition well. Serviceable player, had a long enough career, but did not merit his draft position whatsoever. The truculence was the word of the day when they drafted him. You know,
I mean,
but that's a good question, Greg.
There's a couple of interesting things, like when you talk about comparables, right? So it's interesting. You got to look at how the team is looking at them as well. So I just happened to pop this up. I'm not going to pretend I knew this off the top of my head, but Jordan Harris's contract is 1.4 for 2 years. So Jordan Harris is currently theoretically it's not more. It's actually more than theoretical. It's a fact. He's paid more. He's paid more than Xhekaj, right? Same term, the same kind of thing, but a touch more, which is I find interesting. So to your point, there are question marks about Xhekaj and Barron. Let's talk about the ones that just got signed, and we're not going to talk about Harris for the time being. You know, Barron, 100%, I'm with you. And like I mentioned earlier, that to me is 100% show me. To your point, Vito, I believe that they actually made sure to get him because he's a right-hand shot, and he does have a little bit of a high pedigree of what he came from, but he's not been able to translate that into the NHL yet. The hope is kid finds another gear, and you're looking at yet again another good defenseman on the Canadiens, right-hand shot, like you say they're lacking, and you end up figuring out that contract in the future. The Xhekaj perspective was a little bit different. I'd imagine if I knew, which I don't know at all, and this is speculation, I would imagine their camp looked for a lot more term, and maybe not so much more money, but I could see them coming around and saying 3 a year, 5 years or something, like get that money locked up. To your point, I don't think that he's necessarily earned that yet. You're talking about a potential $5 million. Could he? Excuse me.
Again,
maybe. Like his ceiling.
If he hits his ceiling.
I don't know. Again, I can only look at today. It's hard to project these things. I like what he brings to the team. I like what his sort of, when he's on the ice, there's a noticeable difference in the way teams play against the Canadiens than versus when he's not there. That's a fact. I like that if he can work on the offense a bit more. I do think he's got a boomer shot. I mean, yeah, it could be something that's going to be a net positive for both. You get 2 years of him real cheap. He's out there. He's patrolling the blue line. He's protecting his guys, and he can put up a little bit of offense and maybe work on his defense even more so. And yeah, you could have yourself a real serviceable player. I'm more curious about Guhle. That contract is the one that I circle and say to myself, that's fascinating to me. Because before this, we kind of mused about, could he be a trade chip?
Yeah, we had an episode on that.
A lot of people out there saying you absolutely don't look to trade Guhle. This is a core piece. This is a core guy. 6 years is locking up a core guy. Sure. And I believe that too. But what I think is interesting is you have his cap, who's obviously trying to go for 8 and max term. And like you say, the Jake Sanderson comparable contract, 8 times 8. And that would have been big to see. I would have been like, ooh, I don't know if
he was never going to get that because it seems like there's an internal cap, but just in and around that.
But what's interesting is they don't have problems, this management group, of giving out 8-year contracts. And I feel like, to steal a phrase from the NBA a little bit, and the NFL, you put the franchise tag on somebody when you do something like that. Suzuki's got the franchise tag. Slafkovsky's got the franchise tag. Caulfield, franchise tag. They got the big contracts. 6 is a big contract. I'm not saying no. I think it's very good for the Habs. I think it's very good how Kent Hughes managed to make this happen. But if they really viewed him as franchise defenseman on the team, I think you would have saw an 8. You would have saw 8. It wouldn't have been 8-8, but it would have been, I don't know, maybe in the 6s or something, and that's it. You lock him up, it's done. They didn't. And I find that curious. Not necessarily, I think, does that make him expendable, but I just find it curious that they did that. Now, could it be because of the injuries? And could it be because they haven't quite seen what he's capable of because he's playing on his offside? Maybe. Or maybe Kent Hughes is just an amazingly shrewd businessman and he managed to get something and he didn't want to put that much cap extra onto this. And the way to keep it down was to go shorter term. I don't know. I look at the number and I find it interesting. Am I personally happy about it? Yes, I am. I think this is a great contract for him. It's a great contract for the team, and it works out for everybody.
It is definitely a great contract for him because at the end of it all, he's still going to be 28, 29 and it's still in his prime years as a defenseman. You know what I mean? Defensemen are late bloomers. They typically, unless you're like an elite Akil McCarr and one of those guys, but I mean, typically defensemen really start hitting their strider around that 25 mark and then go on for until about 32 before you really start seeing a massive.
But if you believe in your guy, wouldn't you want him on the lower cap, if you will, for those extra years into his prime? If you believed in him,
I don't think we're obviously not in the room, but I think that if they had to go 8, the cap would have had to have been significantly higher to justify the extra 2 years to get him into 30 years old.
For sure,
right?
And I'm sure that they didn't want to, but
this was, I think, the compromise. He's a UFA at the end of it all. He could decide what he wants to do at that point.
A five-team no trade clause, I believe, in his last year too, but when you think of it, 5 teams, it's really not a lot. No, it's not.
It's enough to say that we have the flexibility to move you, but you can choose certain teams that are completely axed. Like it's not happening those teams.
I always find it funny when they add those kind of things. Last year, 5 teams, like whatever. Right? And I'm not saying boo. It's just for the sake of conversation, just throwing it out there. There are some teams that don't give 8. They just don't do it for whatever reason. They just don't max out contracts, and for whatever the reasons are. I know the Canadiens are one of the teams that do. We've seen them do it. And when you apply that franchise tag, they're saying with this, he's our guy. He's our guy. We want him long term, and we like this. But he's at a number, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate. He's at a number and a term that it might not be now, but if he had an 8 as his term, it'd be very hard to consider to move him. For some reason, with a 6, to me, they're leaving themselves just enough wiggle room that if push comes to shove, he could be a guy in their mind that they can see moving on from. To facilitate something else for the team.
Keep in mind, it's actually 7 years because he still has this coming season on his 800,000.
Yeah, no, but
it's 7 years of Kaiden Guhle. You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of when not the same player, not putting them in the same category before I even say it, but when Carey Price signed his second contract, it was a 6-year deal, and people are like, why don't you just sign him long term if he's your goalie of the future? And people have the same questions you're having right now. But everyone was like, look and say, hey, Carey Price 6 years, and I think it was like $6.5 million was a steal. Then eventually the 6 years passed, and we all know what the contract was after that. But now I'm not going to say Guhle's going to earn a $10.5 million contract at the end of his new contract. But if he becomes the core piece that we think of, if he ends up hitting his stride and being a bona fide two-way top pairing hard minute eating player, and commands $8-9 million at that point, he bet on himself. The Canadiens did keep him in the fold for 6 years during what we think is going to be some contending years in a couple of years from now. But it reminds me a lot of that Carey Price contract, the second one, where it's 6 years.
And I find it interesting what you said about the franchise tag, that they were willing to give it to other players, and that maybe it was because of the fact that Guhle was labeled a little bit more injury prone, while Slav and Caulfield also missed like half a season right before, so they were ready to go 8 with them, even though there were still some concerns, except for Suzuki, who's like unbreakable.
He's an Iron Man. Yeah, he's an Iron Man.
Yeah,
let's not jinx it.
Sorry,
let's not jinx it.
Yeah, well, I think he's just unbreakable, whatever we say, so whatever. But except for him, like every long-term contract, it seems like those guys have already been injury-prone before. But and for what Vito said about the 6-year deals, Carey Price signed one, but also other guys like Gallagher right before. It was on a very cheap deal at like 3.75, and then signed a long contract and a pricey one. So, and I think it was it was a similar thing for Petrie as well. Was in a good contract, or Bergevin signed a few 6-year deals, and they were like very good value at the time. And then 6-year deals right after the ELC is often like walking those players right into their prime. And I feel like oftentimes it's like those 2 extra years, like Gallagher 2 years later, he wouldn't have earned a 6-year, $6.5 million contract.
Gallagher is an exception. And I stand by this statement because Gallagher was given that contract by a very emotional GM, a player's GM, and he paid him for services rendered, but not for what he's going to do.
Above that.
But I get your point.
Like even Carey Price, like 2 years later after his MVP season, maybe the price would have been a little bit more down, and after the injuries and all that. But I feel like oftentimes when you sign the guy 6 years after the ELC, you just walk him right into a UFA status and like the prime of his career, and you tend to give him more money than
Greg brings up a very good point there.
If you had those two
it depends.
Montreal has had the history of having to overpay once they get to the UFA years to keep those types of players.
But it depends who really fought for it. So if you listen to what was said, and if it is true, and we don't really know these things, but we can play the game, and that his agent came out and said we were looking for 8. So we're going to take it on value that the Guhle camp was looking for 8, but the money was too high. So if maybe Kent countered and said, we'll give you 8, but it can't be 8 for 8. It's got to be closer to like 6.7 or maybe 7. And maybe they sat back and said, that's $8 million that I'd rather not. And so they came to an agreement. Maybe that's the outcome. Or maybe they don't view him as integral as some of the other guys, and they just didn't want to slap that 8 years. And they're confident that they know what his plateau is going to be. And when he goes UFA, if he's still serviceable and he's still good, but he's not a number 1, he's more like a 3, then you hit him again with another 6-7 year deal at a digestible cap.
Think of it this way.
I don't know.
I was saying before that somebody like Xhekaj, if he hits the ceiling, is 5.5. Guhle's got way more talent and skill than Xhekaj does. Different style of hockey, but has way more talent and skill, and he got 5.5 now. Guhle has the potential that in a year or 2 years, maybe even as soon as the upcoming season, provided he stays healthy, where you look at 5.5 and it's actually going to look like a discount for him. That's the thing about looking at Guhle's contract. It has the potential to look like it's a
But are they going to be competing then? It's cool to have him take the next step while he's still making 5.5, because that means you can round out the team with more cap space and actually be competitive. But are they going to be competitive in the next 2-3 years of him being 5.5 if he takes that next step?
They basically gave Guhle Petrie-like money. Petrie's first contract. They gave him that kind of money.
Yeah, and I just to give you some examples, I saw a tweet from like a capologist, Jean-François, on Twitter, who's like crazy about stuff. And he's like, Bergevin has signed like similar contracts. So like Pacioretty, 4.5 for 6 years right off the ELC. Gallagher, 2.75. Petrie, 5.5, all for 6 years. So the comparables I don't like, but at the moment I can't complain. Like I like the contract, but I do think like the comparables are a little bit like not as good as I would have liked them. Yeah.
No, but it comes down to Greg's point. He's definitely, there is a chance that this contract at the end of it, provided if Guhle hits his full ceiling and all that, could kind of hurt the Montreal Canadiens. Kind of. We don't know what that cap would look like. We don't know if we want to keep it. But there is something, there's the other side of this coin. Back then when Montreal had to sign certain players, and then, by the time they got to their UFA years and basically Montreal had to overpay whatever, Montreal did not have the luxury of having replacements for some of these players. They just didn't have that overall depth to say, okay, you're going to go walk, you're going to do your own thing, you're going to, go to another team. Montreal would be screwed. You look and say there's a massive hole in that position. Today, if we're looking at the roster and the depth and the stars that they have in the pipeline, especially on LD, is if that in a couple of years or a few years from now, or even when Guhle hits the end of his stride on that contract, Montreal's got, assuming, there's going to be change in the trades and all that stuff. But Montreal, you could literally say, if Guhle goes, there's going to be somebody that could replace him. Maybe Lane Hudson plugs into that number one top pairing guy, and you have to find a second pairing guy. But back then, they didn't have another number one goalie that they could have replaced. I mean, the Carey Price one maybe was because of the Halak at the time, but then Goldsey got rid of Halak for a sack of potatoes. But other than that, if you looked at all the other players, Pacioretty, you didn't have another power forward winger or pseudo power forward winger. You didn't have the depth there that you could plug and play and replace and trade for it, or the assets to go trade and replace these guys. This is where I see a massive difference. That in 6 years from now, if Guhle were to walk, even if he becomes great, there's somebody that could do something and replace it. Maybe Reinbacher could do what he's doing a few years later. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's going to take time to see how it plays out, and we can only hope for it's going to be mutually beneficial for both. He's going to become, let's say he becomes the next top defenseman. I mean, that's great. Then pay him at the end of 6. Then it's fine. You pay him, he earns it, he deserves it, and you have one of the best defensemen in the league. I don't necessarily think he's going to progress to that point, but if he could be a 1-2, like a 1B or a solid 2, and the 6 years are up, I think you're going to sign him again long term, and you're going to pay him what he should be earning, and it's all going to work out fine.
I want to put Greg on the spot. I want to put Greg on the spot since he put me on the spot before. What is your comparable for goalie?
You're so petty.
I have a player in mind. I do have a player in mind.
Like in the style of player or the contract wise?
Style of player.
Like if it's a ceiling, maybe some. I think it's a long shot, but maybe a guy like Jacob Slavin from Carolina, a good two-way guy that puts up points but also is very sound and very agile on his skates, so can keep up with fast forwards and also defend very well and has some offensive like.
That's a good comparable.
What was your?
I was gonna say Hannafin.
Yeah, that too. Like
maybe a little less on the offense, especially now that Hannafin's gonna have the Vegas support. Maybe Guhle doesn't hit to that 47, 50-point stride at occasion, or 45, and it's more like a 38, 42-point guy when he hits the ceiling. There might be a little bit of a dip on offensively in comparison to Hannafin, but the defensive game, I think Guhle might have the edge over Hannafin.
But I think we haven't seen just yet the full offensive potential of Guhle, because we practically never saw him on the power play on any of that. And I think we just didn't want to burn him. He's already played so much minutes on the PK, and also we kind of wanted to see what he would do defensively. And if all goes well, maybe he's going to get some more offensive responsibilities. But I think there's still some untapped potential offensively where he could put up some pretty respectable numbers.
At 22 years old, he's already on pace for a little under 21 minutes a game. That's his average.
He's playing just a lot, but just out of those 21 minutes, there's like maybe 10 seconds average per game on the power play.
Yeah, for sure. They've been playing him more against on the PK or bigger role against bigger players like Connor McDavid. You've seen him play against Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, and them whenever he faces them. He's been relied upon on that front. So yeah, I do think there's some untapped offensive potential there. It's more health, and even at that, it's 2 seasons now in Montreal. He's played 44 and 70 games. He's got to hit that 80 game mark.
He's got to stay healthy. If he can
he's
stay healthy,
he has to bulk up.
Well, whatever he's got to do to not be hurt, that's what he has to do. Because you're right, his style of game, he's not a very passive player. He's a physical player. He's out there. He's a two-way guy. Puts a lot of minutes on the ice. He's got to find a way to not get hurt. And if he doesn't get hurt, it's going to benefit the team tremendously, and it's going to benefit him in a couple of years when he starts talking about extensions in his next contract. I did want to quickly jump to something completely different, though, because, again, it's something that everybody and anybody who's a Canadiens fan who is still paying attention in July and August is talking about, and it's my personal favorite topic because I love how polarized the fan base is about this. Patrik Laine.
Oh, boy.
It's out there again. He's out of the assistance program. A million things are happening. The GM's making quotes. We're looking for a trade and whatever. Everybody, it's Laine. I want to just ask it in this way. I think this is not the easiest way, but this is the the fairest way. I want you both to give me the pros and the cons of if the Canadiens were to trade for Patrik Laine. I don't care the package. Let's assume a package is put together and everybody and their mom says, okay, that's a fair deal.
Yeah, if
I
it's
want to know
reasonable.
about the player himself and on the Canadiens. Give me pros, give me cons.
Well, I think like since last time we talked about it, I'm a little bit more in favor. And like last time, I completely
Sure.
like, shut it down, especially with like Pascal Vincent and all that stuff. I think I can see now something that maybe I hadn't taken in consideration as much as the contract and the term. You know, if it's a complete failure and like he doesn't perform or whatever, it's a 2-year deal. It's you got 2 years left of him. So I think that's a very good thing to take into consideration if, like you said, the trade is reasonable and all of that. I think that it's a little bit less worrisome, just so that we're not stuck with him. I've talked about him a little bit, but like if the contract was a little bit longer, like I'll go back to him, like Jonathan Drouin. When we acquired him, we signed him right away for 6 years, and the experiment after 2 years, after 3 years, we knew right away, it wasn't meant to be. With Laine, we have a 2-year sample size before we can make a decision. Like after 2 years, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. We can let him walk. If it works out, we can extend him for longer. Also, another pro is obviously he would be the best natural goal scorer on the team. He's it's something that we like. I see Matt is
I'm happy you're seeing the light. I'll get to my stance on it, which I think is pretty obvious. But yes.
And I think
cons. Give me the cons. People want to know the cons.
Let him finish.
How many pros does he have? Is it only pros? We should just go sign him right now?
Most obvious con, obviously, is I'm very skeptical about whether or not he would perform here. I think
there you go.
Some people have said, well, he's played his best in Canadian markets, and you can compare Winnipeg's to Montreal's market. Montreal wouldn't let him get away with poor effort, like his a little bit of his reputation, poor defense, and all that. Even if he puts up points, I think he'd be like front page of newspaper if he doesn't play an all-around game that is like up to the standard. And if he doesn't put up effort, even if he puts up points, he's gonna be under the microscope. Obviously, maybe it's not gonna be a blockbuster deal like it would have been like 2-3 years ago if we were to acquire Laine. Maybe the price is at an all-time low now, but I think it's still a big name and he's going to draw a lot of attention. And so, people are going to say, well, if we acquire him, he's not going to be the big name. He's not going to be like under like so much pressure, but it's not true. Like if we acquire Patrik Laine, he's still a big name. He's still a guy that broke records at 19, 20 years old. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on him. And I'm still very skeptical about whether or not he can live up to Montreal's market's standards.
That's very good analysis, Greg.
It's very good.
Close to mine.
I will say this. Okay, Montreal's lacking goals. The guy can pot goals. He's a big body. He can do that. He plays a bit of a power forward game when he wants to. There's a lot of things to like, but there's a lot of red flags with him too. There's been some issues with two different teams now. Will there be issues with Montreal if he were to get to Montreal? We don't know. What I kind of agree and disagree with, Greg, is being under the spotlight in Montreal. Yes, every player in Montreal is under the spotlight, but it's slightly different with Montreal nowadays because there's so many other players that Laine would have a certain support cast that he doesn't have to be the go-to guy. I also think it would depend on what they would trade for to acquire him. If they trade a fan favorite or a big name, or since Montreal fans tend to really like potential and upside, including myself, if they trade a player that we haven't seen their full potential yet, or it's somebody that we're so eager to see what they get, what they become, then you could say there's always going to be the comparison. What's, we got Laine, but that player, what's he going to become and all that stuff. So it would all depend. If it's a lot of the pieces that we've heard rumors for to be involved, a first is what is some of the rumors. Harris being a piece, and a contract going the other way. I think fans are just going to kind of look at it and say, we had too much, we opened space, and we brought in a guy who happens to be a former second overall, who's happened to be a former 40-goal scorer, who can be productive, and is now going to be under Martin St. Louis' tutelage and all that stuff. Then you look at it, they're going to look at it a bit different, and he won't be under the spotlight so much. Not to the degree that like some of our other star players have been in the past. He's just going to be part of the whole system now. He's going to be part of the cast.
He's still going to be facing more pressure.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Especially if they if they were to acquire him at the full cap, but at a retained salary, if you get him in the 6s and 7s, then you look like he's part of the cast. I also think that he could potentially be a stopgap until Demidov comes. I do think that, because I think that that's where you could say, okay, it's 2 years. He goes, Demidov comes in about 2 years with Demidov's talent and skill set, could potentially start hitting his stride on year 3.
The pros
are outweighing the cons now.
The cons. And there are cons. I'm not going to suggest that this is an absolute unequivocal slam dunk. There are cons, but you cannot look at this. You can't. It's impossible. I don't know how people are doing it, where you just look at a guy and say that he has whatever he's had, right? His issues, and he'll never be able to handle Montreal. Never, because he's had issues before. Guys, please. Bear in mind where he played. He played in Winnipeg and he played in Columbus. All due respect, right? Anybody could get into a little bit of trouble in their own head sitting in those places. It's very dull. It's very dull. And if you are prone to that kind of thing, you can fall into it. Now, Montreal offers first off, it's an entire European flair in our city. We know that much.
You're selling Montreal again, aren't you?
I'm selling Montreal again because people have to understand European players, when they play here and then they leave, they always come back to that when they talk about their time here, that there's so much similarities between this city and a European city. It's a comfort zone. So you have that. You're playing for the Montreal Canadiens. You're not playing for the Columbus Blue Jackets or the Winnipeg Jets. Again, with respect, but please, you come here, you put the jersey on, it's almost like you get energized again. He has a chip to prove. He wants to find his passion again in hockey. He is a proven goal scorer. He is a big body player. And the pièce de résistance, my friends, like Greg said, 2 years and the age. But you are putting together the prototype of what Kent Hughes is looking for, either as a stopgap, like you're suggesting, or you strike gold. You strike gold. He comes in. You do, maybe they hold some salary. You do some sort of trade that is digestible. Again, suggesting, of course, the trade is fair and we're all cool with it. Mm-hmm. If for some reason they decide to give up a ton of stuff, obviously that's a mistake. But if it's a good, fair trade, he comes here. He's got the big cap. He does well, hypothetically. The following year, he does well again. You now have another top player in your arsenal. You move the pieces around, you make it work, and now he's there with Demidov, for example. If it doesn't work out, what did you lose? You're not coming out to the fans now and telling them that you're going for the cup. You want to take steps in progression, no doubt. But if it doesn't work, what did you lose? It was a legitimate, perfectly viable gamble. And if it doesn't work out, you are loaded on defense anyways, because we all know it's a defensive or several that will be on the move. They have to. Contract player that would likely not be re-signed, and probably that first pick from Calgary, which at this point is a late first anyways. It's not a big deal. You didn't lose much. It's probably going to be that pick. I'm not saying that it won't be, or it will be something. I'd be very surprised if Montreal's pick is the one that they go, but it's going to be a first. Let's be real. So what did you lose? I just, the pros, yes, and could the pressure be too much? Sure. And can he come in here and not be the guy he was, and he puts up 30 points and whatever, he's being paid $8.9 million? Could it be bad? Yeah, could it? There are cons. Well, whatever it is, it's a big giant contract.
It's
but the guys, the upside, I can't see why people are not looking at the potential upside of this. And package it again with the 2-year thing. To me, it's a no-brainer.
I think people see the upside in Patrik Laine. I still don't think Patrik Laine has ever lived up to a second overall pick. Okay, but it's not the first time you see a player that doesn't live up to a second overall pick. With that being said, people see the potential of somebody like Laine, and I think a lot more people are starting to come around versus the last time we spoke about him on a different episode.
I don't know, man. I don't know. You
I
take a
just think
pulse. Sorry, you take a pulse of social media out there. It's not people trying to make arguments to say, yeah, maybe, but I still wouldn't. It is like, no, never get this guy.
This is what I was
like,
trying to get.
okay.
It's people are concerned about the red flags surrounding his mental health, his character. Would potentially be going on his third team.
Would this not be the
just
greatest
finished
place
26.
to address character issues if he has any? And I'm not
I
suggesting he
disagree
does.
about that because
You don't think, really?
no, it'd be the worst place to yeah, because
Really?
it's gonna be the one where it's gonna be the place where it's gonna be the most scrutinized and be the most under.
Forget media. I'm talking about the culture
Well, it's
of the
pretty
team.
hard to forget
No,
about the
but-
media.
but
Ask about
listen,
anyone.
I understand. But no matter what, you're a professional hockey player. You're going to get scrutinized. Will it be worse here than other places? Without question. But if we're talking about a place to foster an environment, a workplace environment for him to thrive in, with this culture that they're building now, with the Martin St. Louis and the Kent Hughes that looks after his guys, and all the stuff that we've been hearing now and being force-fed from this media for the last 2-3 years. I mean, this is a place that it like builds you up. Wouldn't that be a selling point? Wouldn't he want to come here and say, I'm ready to buy into that? I've had two different teams. It didn't really work well. The environments there weren't for me, and it didn't really work, and it reflected in my game. I want to come to a place that is all about that. That's sort of fostering the player and building you back up.
You gotta admit, though,
I don't know, man.
From the little bit that we know and we've seen and whatnot, he does walk around like with a certain level of arrogance. Like he's the
You
guy.
say arrogance, I say eccentricities.
I would say like I'm 100% on board if it's that way that he thinks. Like what you just said, if he thinks like that, yeah, I'm on board. But I think we're in no place to know whether or not that's like his mindset. And I think Kent Hughes has got a much better idea. And so I'm just not sure. And I've said it and I'll say it again. I'm not sure it's the place where he could truly like thrive, because even if he puts up points and goes back, like if he scores 50 goals, like nobody's gonna say anything about it. But I doubt it a lot. So like if he just puts up like let's say 25-30 goals and all that, he's still, he's not gonna be invincible from bad games and from media getting to them, and it's not anywhere close. Like he's going to be more criticized even if he has a good season this season. Let's say he scores 30 goals, he's still going to be facing more. He's going to be more criticized this season than he did over the last 2 years, even though he didn't play up to the standard at all.
But who would do? And I'm not suggesting that nobody would do it. I'm sort of saying it rhetorically. Who would do that? You get a guy, he's coming back from getting himself mentally checked and
would
healed.
criticize him?
But if you're saying he scores 30 goals, and let's assume let's throw in 20 assists. It's a 50-point season. It's not world breaking. It's not good enough for a second overall pick, no doubt. But
it's not good for an $8.7 million
hold on a
player.
second. Are
You
we
don't know
suggesting
who would criticize a 50-point player because he doesn't put up effort or good defensive numbers? Look at all the people who criticized the former third overall pick that we acquired against a defenseman.
You're comparing apples to oranges, my friend. They're
How?
criticizing
He put
him
up
far more because of what Sergachev became. If they traded a plunger for him, he would not have had the same level
then
of
it goes
scrutiny.
back. Okay, you're not wrong on that. It goes back to what I said. It will depend on what they would trade.
You're not going to trade for Patrik Laine and give up a huge thing. So that we're talking, guys, the only way he comes here, the only way is if he gets through interviews with Kent Hughes, who tells him about the culture here, and he sees the buy-in, and he comes in here with that sort of mentality, and the value of the trade is not outrageous. It's the only way. I'm not saying move heaven and earth to get Patrik Laine, but I'm saying if they acquire him for something reasonable, that's what everybody needs to keep putting in check. They're not going to write a blank check to get this guy. They're going to get him for something of basically expendable parts from the team. How do you not take a flyer on this guy for expendable parts on the team with the upside that he could have?
Okay, well,
and I understand what your point. I know what you're trying to say, Greg. I know what you're trying to say. I feel it, and I'm not taking my frustration out on you, but you are the mouthpiece of the people that are out there on the social media saying this. I don't comprehend. If they hold back some money, let's say they hold back $2 million, you got a $6 million player putting up 50 points, 30 goals. Who on this team puts up 30 goals? Name me the players that put up 30 goals on the Habs last year.
Suzuki. And Caulfield was off by 2 goals, but yeah.
We're going to rip a guy for being one of the other only player who puts up 30 goals? I don't see it, man. Because it's not the same thing as the Drouin trade. You didn't give up future. You didn't give up a guy like Sergachev in this.
You're still going to need to give up a good defenseman.
If you gave up, hypothetically, it's a hypothetical, last little take on it. First from Calgary, Montreal third, Jordan Harris, and Joel Armia. It's been out there for quite a bit. A bunch of people talking about that.
Because of that one fake scout.
Okay. What do you got to add? What do you got to add?
Let's say you just give up a first, a late first, like the Calgary one that's likely going to be Florida's, and then you give up Xhekaj. Then what's your reaction on it?
I'm pissed.
I'm for it, but I'm not super happy. And if I find out that was the ask and they didn't do it, I'd be okay with it too. But if you asked me, if I were GM, would I do that move? Yeah, I do that move.
Okay, and then if Xhekaj becomes, like Vito said, a $5 million defenseman, and the Laine experiment completely goes wrong, do you agree that maybe in the second year, even if he puts up 30 goals, he's going to be under crazy under the microscope and going to be criticized a lot?
No, I don't see him being. If he puts up 30 goals, if that's what if that's what he starts to make, and you ended up trading that first and Xhekaj and whatever, something else, and he ends up being a 30-goal, 55 point player, and then they possibly re-sign him to a far more digestible long-term contract, and you got a guy who has 65 points in him and a 30-goal perennial goal scorer, and I had to give up Xhekaj, who may become a 4, a legitimate 4, and being paid $500 million because of the depth of defensemen on this team. Yes, I have no problem.
Montreal's got the depth of defensemen.
Don't make no
mistake. I've said that many times, but they don't have the depth of defensemen that have a style like Xhekaj. There's 2 guys that could kind of play the physical element on the current depth chart for Montreal: Xhekaj and Struble. That's it. There's nobody else that's physical.
Not that I hold Struble in the highest of esteem comparatively to what I would like Xhekaj to be, but if that's the case, then you have his replacement built in. He's there. They already have him.
Matt, I'm just gonna say, even if he puts up 50 points, I don't know how you can say that he's going to be criticized, because he's obviously going to be criticized a lot. Whether because it's just the way he plays does not fit. Even if he puts up 50 points, which would be disappointing in my opinion, honestly, if he puts up 50 points, he's going to be criticized a lot. And you look at, I'm going to give you an example, and you're not going to like it, I know, and I've said it before. You didn't give up anything for Mike Hoffman. You just got him in free agency, and he was on pace for around 45 points when he was on the Canadiens. And look at how that turned out. He stayed for 2 years, like maybe Laine would. And then we did everything we could to ship him out, and he didn't make $8.7 million.
But he had contracts still. Laine, if the experiment fails, like you said in the beginning, it is only 2 years.
Mike Hoffman was 3 years, and
that extra year hurts. That extra year hurt. The 2-year thing is, think about it. It's next season and half of the following season, because you could probably flip him.
Hold on. If we're to use Hoffman, I get what you're saying.
I just pulled up his numbers because I want to close the book on this. We're talking about 50 point being a upsetting, and he's not being the guy that he's supposed to be, et cetera, et cetera. Here's Patrik Laine's points from his very first season, right? 64 and 73, 70 and 82, 50 and 82, 63 and 68, and then he's been basically hurt or taken out because of things, but 21, 56, 52, and 9. So if he comes back from that last season, and he comes back at around 50 and 30 goals, he's right at what you expect him to be. But if he takes off more to his potential,
it's not the same, because 50 points in Montreal, while not being a complete player, is not the same as 50 points in Columbus or in Winnipeg, where it seems like people just don't care if you put up points. In Montreal, if you put up 50 points and lack effort, lack defensive...
There you said it, young Greg. There you said it. I am making an assumption that he will not drift on the ice and put in a few weeks at a time of not being
How can you assume that? Because he's always been like that.
I'm assuming it because this is a second chance at his career and revitalizing his career. He has everything to prove.
It's time I jump in. I got cut off twice. It's time I jump in.
Jump in. You have 2 minutes. We have to wrap up.
Patrik Laine's style was never going to be and is never going to be a complete player. So he's got to be productive if he wants to even have the value and contract that he's going to potentially merit and potentially deserve after the 2 years. So Greg's right on that. Now to the Hoffman point, yes, Hoffman posted 40 points, 50 points, and when Montreal acquired him for nothing essentially, and they had signed him, people said, "Wow, this is great. We've got a potential for 40 goal scorer or even 35 goals." But when you saw him on the ice, to Greg's point, it's the guy put no effort. He was basically, you had to set him up. Everybody had to do the work for him. Okay, and you could have seen he had terrible hockey IQ. Now, Laine does not have terrible hockey IQ. He's just not a defensive player. He's not an all-around player. So you got to get the production from him. If you don't get, at the very least, in my opinion, okay, especially if you're going to trade a contract and all that to balance things out, if you're not getting at least 65 points and 35 goals from this guy, it's a fail. It's a fail. Because he's not going to bring you anything else other than the offensive side of the game. So he's got to be productive. And when you're getting paid 8.7, okay, let's say there is no other contract going the other way, and he is the $8.7 million player and no retention, he's got to produce, because that means players that are on our team, that are Montreal-based players and drafted or even have been traded for, Suzuki, which we traded for, is outproducing the guy who was a second overall pick. So, yes, he is going to get scrutinized. He is going to be under the lens in Montreal. He just won't be under the lens as much as, say, back then when Montreal only had a Kovalev that was productive, or a Pacioretty that was the only goal scorer, where they only had the one piece that could produce. That's the difference with having a Patrik Laine in today's Montreal Canadiens roster. He doesn't have to be the guy. When they acquired Drouin, okay, and they gave up a Sergachev, Drouin was brought here with this big title. Like, he's going to be the guy, the savior, the
number one center. Number one center. Immediately 6-year contract, like you mentioned. It's a different ball game. Anybody, you know what? I blame the people with their expectations. I don't blame the guy.
I did not compare like Laine to Drouin's situation, but why I brought him up was because even though he put up 53 points, people still wanted him out, still criticize him like no other player on the team, and he put up 53 points. And so it's about not only the points, it's about all around game. And I think in that sense they're comparable in terms of effort, in terms of defensive style. Even if you put up 50 plus points, it's not enough for the average Montreal Canadiens fan, especially if you're a big name or was a big name like Patrik Laine. That was my point.
Patrik Laine would have to put up at least similar points to Pacioretty's peak for us to be like, okay, it's digestible.
And also, the one thing that too is, I hope to God that if we trade for him, there's going to be some money retention, because if he, like I said, he could work out very well, and obviously I hope for that. But if he doesn't, and he's being paid 8.7, and like there's that whole money hierarchy that we respect, and that nobody's getting paid more than Suzuki at 7.8, and then he comes in at 8.7, and he doesn't put up effort, doesn't put up points. It's gonna look terrible, man. I'm just saying.
You guys are such doom and gloom guys, man. I don't know.
No, it's not doom and gloom. We just after we know this market. If you the only way there's 2 players that would have to go the other way where people would digest it. Bringing Patrik Laine in, Patrik Laine doesn't produce at to his full potential, is if you either move Dvorak or if you move Josh Anderson. You get rid of any of those two contracts, and people say, okay, Josh Anderson, for example, you traded away 5.5, but we took in 8.7 for $3.7 million more. I'd rather have Patrik Laine,
Yeah,
hypothetically.
that's not
Okay,
happening.
Dvorak at 4.45.
That
You look
might
and you
happen.
say, you trade off the cap. But
Listen, man.
the retaining salaries, Montreal, in order for Columbus to retain salary, Montreal would have to give a solid piece more than what we've discussed and what the rumors are out there.
Everything that I said is based on an assumption that the trade that they're going to do is not going to be a bad trade. I am not for him coming here on a gamble for giving up anything of substance. I want to get him in bulk. I want to give you the pieces, a bunch of pieces, and I want to take him in. And yeah, you got to figure the money some way, somehow. Maybe get a third team in there. I don't know how they're going to do it, but yeah, the money needs to come down a little bit to make it really nice. Otherwise, as the player, just looking at the player himself and what he can bring to the team, and I believe in it. I'm just choosing to believe in it. I don't know Patrik Laine at all, but I'm choosing to believe that this guy has penned articles and has been very public and open about his battles with the mental health and stuff, and his loss of passion of the game. And he's coming out now. We got videos of him doing workout. He seems to be in a better place. I feel like this is a guy who has the skill that you would be smart money to bet on to have him do a look, I'm still me kind of season.
Let me just read out this one last thing because it actually came out. It's a bit of an update on Laine. Okay. Blue Jackets GM Don Waddell told Brian Hedger of the Columbus Dispatch that only a single team has actually reached out to him with interest in talking trade about the former superstar sniper. But with this being said, the dog days of summer in the NHL, Waddell told Hedger that he's not too concerned, nor does he expect things to heat up anytime soon on the Laine front. At this time, in quotes, at this time of the year, people are less responsive, so I don't really know. I think it's going to play out for a while. So I don't think we're anywhere close to a Laine trade.
I'm not suggesting that we are close. It's just everybody was talking about it. I want to get your guys' takes. And I understand that. I think they're well thought of. I'm just trying to take a more optimistic approach than you two pessimists seemingly are taking. And I look at it and I think that, go back a year before last season, he was almost point a game. The year before that, he was point a game. He has the potential.
I'm like I said at the start. I put up I said a lot of pros, and you were the one to say, "Well, talk about the cons now."
But you went hard on the cons, Greg.
I'm a lot more in favor than I was like a week or two ago. But
good.
I'm not pessimistic about it, but I'm trying to be more realistic, and I feel like maybe you're trying to be too optimistic.
A little too optimistic. Yeah. Okay.
It's the middle of summer. Give this to me. Talk to me again in a couple weeks about it, and then maybe more things come out. And maybe we hear the trade packages. They want something stupid, and at which point I don't want the trade to happen. Again, I reiterate, I don't want him for any blank check. It has to make sense. I just kind of took a little bit of exception to those that are out there that are just an unequivocal no. Don't, even if you got him for free and they kept his whole salary. No, he's a bad guy, bad character, bad this, not a lazy player. I just don't see how that outweighs the pros that you can get. That's all I'm saying. And that's what I want to ask you all. We know a bunch of you have been in the comments before about Laine. We ask you to bring it back again. Tell us your pros and cons. Let's try to keep it balanced. Give us an example of the pros and the cons and what you think, which side outweighs the other, as well as your takes on the three contracts that we mentioned: Wi-Fi, Barron, and Guhle.
And I can finish on that. I think where you were about to be done here. I asked actually on Twitter the question this morning. I think you saw it, Matt, about the jersey swap and all that. And I asked if in a reasonable trade, people would be in favor or against Patrik Laine in Montreal in a reasonable trade. So if, like you said, like we've talked about, if the trade isn't completely unreasonable, and 81% of people, of Canadiens fans, are for it. So
yes, sir.
I think
Smart
people
fan
are
base.
seeing the pros, but that's taken into consideration. That's a reasonable trade, which we can be assured. Just
No, we can't. We can't. And again, we don't run the show here. And if we end up finding out they did trade something insane, like, and whatever. I'm not putting names because people hate when you put names, but whatever. It is so not a good trade, but they do it anyways. Yeah, I won't be happy, even if Laine comes in with all the promise. It's got to make sense. Let us know again in the comments. We're going to wrap it up here. Thanks so much, guys, for taking the time out of your day in the summer. We'll let you get back to the fun in the sun and the heat. And again, like, subscribe if you haven't already. We really do appreciate it. Keeps us going. Keeps us knowing that you guys want to hear us and our sometimes interesting takes. For Greg, Vito, I'm Matt, and this was Get Pucked.